Right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It has gone 10 o'clock, so we will make a start because we've got quite a bit of business to get through. Welcome to this morning's meeting of the Scrutiny Commission. This is a separate meeting, but it's obviously a continuation of the last two meetings in the sense of the issue that we're focused on, which is a proposed unitary structure for Leicestershire. Can I just point out again, as I always do, that the meeting is being webcast live to the public. For those not able to watch the footage live, the webcast will be available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. Can I remind members and officers to please switch your microphone on when speaking and then turn it off when you finish speaking. We've got a number of substitutions today. Mr. Harrison is here in place of Dr. Feltham. Mrs. Wright is here in place of Mrs. Seaton. Mr. Parton is here in place of Mr. Bedford. This is getting complicated now. Who's replacing Mr. Pendleton because he's moved to a Cabinet Support member to focus on HS2. And Mr. Pearson has given his apologies. He can't be with us this morning, so sorry if that sounds complicated. Now, continuing with the formalities, question time. I have no questions today, nor do I have any questions under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. There are no urgent items to be taken today. Now, declarations of interest. I'm assuming that all members who are also district or borough councillors or parish councillors will wish to declare a personal interest in item 7, development of a unitary structure. Are we all happy with that? Mm-hmm. Declare a blanket. Does anybody have any other declarations they need to declare today? Okay, that's good. Are there any declarations of the party whip today? No, good. Presentation of petitions. I've not received any petitions under this item. So that takes us swiftly then to item 7, which is the development of the unitary structure.
Should we all also declare an interest under that? Yes.
Yes, I'm assuming that under the item 8, the HIF bids, again, that will apply for double-hatted members. Okay. So that takes us then to the substantive issue, which is the development of the unitary structure. Now, this morning we've got the invitation that I sent out a few weeks ago to give the district council leaders the opportunity to come and talk to us and share their views with us and any issues they want to raise, really. So I'm going to give them the floor in a minute to do that. Can I just say that in terms of where we are, members will recall that there was a sheet. We'd still got quite a few officers to hear from, and there was then going to be some feedback from what had took place in the committees. It's just not going to be possible to do that today because we do need to look at this housing and infrastructure bid because it's going to Cabinet on the 18th. So what I'm going to do this morning is focus on hearing our colleagues from the district councils, and then when we've done that, we'll have a quick comfort break, and then we need to move on to discuss the HIF bids, and then we will have to have another meeting in January to decide where we're going next with the unitary structure. Various members have said there are other organisations or other individuals they wish to hear from, and that's absolutely fair, and Nick's given me assurances that we'll have time to do that and come back to it in January. So I hope that's okay in terms of how we're going to play it today. Now, I'd like to welcome Mike Hall and Neil Bannister, leaders from Hinckley, Bosworth and Harbour District Councils, respectively. We've also obviously got Nick Rushton here this morning. Nick, yesterday, I think it would just help, you made a statement following your group meeting on Tuesday of how you see things going just in terms of process. I think it would be helpful for everyone here this morning if you could just repeat that, and then I'll open it up to our district colleagues.
Yeah, that's fine, Simon. Can I first of all give Byron's apologies? He's unwell. He would have been here today to support me, but he can't get. Can I, as leader of the council, formally thank the two district leaders, Neil and Mike, for coming in to give evidence. I know it's your invite, but I thank them for treating it seriously like everybody else has, and for coming in. What I type of said yesterday in the round was that the process continues, which we agreed at our group meeting. You can carry on doing what you're doing, and if, as you've said, I mean, as you know, I need to go at 1 o'clock today anyway. If you need further meetings, just carry on, call who you like, try and reach a conclusion sometime towards at the end of next month-ish, because then you've got to write a full report on your views to Cabinet. That will then be reported to Cabinet, and it is our intention then to commission a business case stroke vision document as talked about by Baroness Scott. That'll take a number of months. I wouldn't have thought we'd get that back because we're only going to use internal officers, not third parties, so we don't have the cost of it. I would have thought we'd get that back sometime in the middle of May. Then that will come to Cabinet again for more comment, because it'll be an officer document, obviously led by the administration. And then I would send that back to you guys here at Scrutiny to form future views on it. And then when we've got that, I would like to take it to full council at some time in the future, is what I said, because I don't want to fix a date, because I said yesterday I don't want to be hung by my own petard. But that would be like what we would like to do. And then all that would really do, if I'm honest, Simon, is it will sit there as the policy of the county council. We know there's very little chance at the present time of government, well, there barely is a government, if I'm honest, but there's very little chance of the government doing anything on local government review. But we'd like to achieve the settled will of the county council, of what the county council thinks is in the best interests of services and the people of Leicestershire. Now, obviously, districts may well disagree, and they may well come up with, ultimately in time, come up with something of their own. But I'm trying to get to the position of what is the settled will of the county council. So if ever anything changes, government's policy or whatever, officers here know which way they're pointing, and members of the county council. And when we sit here, and I know I've got senior district leaders all around me today, but when us guys are here, apart from these two, we are members of the county council. And that's in the round what I said, Simon.
That's helpful. I just thought it's useful to have that, particularly for our two district colleagues, so they have an understanding of where you're going with this. Right, so the floor's yours, gentlemen. Who would like to start? I hope you're willing to take some questions at the end.
Yes, thank you, Simon. Again, I'd like to echo the thanks for extending the invitation to the District Council leaders to come and talk to Scrutiny Commission on this extremely important piece of work that is being undertaken. Mike and I are both very grateful that you have arranged the date in order to accommodate both Mike and myself. So, very much appreciate that. I think what Mike and I would like to do is just to give a couple of opening statements, as it were. We'll be covering different topics in those opening statements, and we'll be happy to take the questions thereafter. I think my opening statement's probably going to be a little bit longer than Mike's, but and because of that, I may be reading as well, and I mean no discourtesy to the Commission for reading from my notes. Firstly, I want to begin by saying that we're not here to defend the status quo as to the delivery of local government services to our residents. I mean, in some respects, this is because there is no status quo, because the delivery of services has been changing, is changing, and will continue to be changing. And districts have undergone transformation programs. We've made quite a significant number of efficiencies. We're engaging in sharing services with each other. And indeed, in the case of Harbour District, we have actually taken steps to reduce the number of councillors to deliver those services. And now we are progressing to the extent that the District and Borough Council leaders are engaged constructively together, that we're united in a desire to look at functional reform, and we need to identify savings, continue to identify savings, all with a view as to looking at what is the best way in which we can deliver for our local residents. And we've recently issued a sort of scoping document to consultants with regard to what they may be able to offer the district and borough councils in terms of functional reform. That review will include place-based public service reforms delivered elsewhere. Have a look at them, what can then be achieved here in Leicestershire. We're not looking at structural reform, we're looking at what can be delivered by good, positive, functional reform of the delivery of services. And we need to provide an evidence-based appraisal of options and opportunities for greater place-based collaboration between all tiers of local government and public services within local localities. The organisations within the scope will include, but not limited to, the county council, district councils, parish councils, CCGs, police, fire, schools, GPs, and to identify the mechanisms for engaging and communicating with communities, partners and key stakeholders in the development of public sector reform options for Leicestershire. So that's an important piece of work that has now been scoped out to be commissioned shortly. And the background to all this is that we have consistently invited the county council to work collaboratively with the districts and boroughs. And I agree, the time is now ripe to explore those opportunities and to engage in meaningful and constructive talks with each other, with the county council, and indeed, where appropriate, with the county's town councils. It is a matter of some regret that the district and borough councils have not been involved at the very start of the county council's process. On one level, it can be argued it's a matter of courtesy to advise the districts about plans to abolish them, particularly less than 1 year before important district council elections. And it's not that some 7 district and borough council leaders may have their positions at risk. What is much more important are the hundreds and hundreds of members of staff that are now concerned about their livelihoods, and those livelihoods, frankly, are at stake in this process, and they have been affected by the announcement. I would have hoped that some early indication about the way in which the county council was going to proceed should have been given, really, to have regard to that particular important aspect of the announcement, so that that could have been perhaps better managed. I don't know if the trade unions had also had any early indication, and if so, what was their views on the announcement. And indeed, I'm sure, Chairman, that if you haven't already done so, you will be taking evidence from the trade unions with regard to the staffing position that is envisaged in the proposals. But on a more practical level, district and borough councils could have been of perhaps assistance at the start of the process, so that we could assist the county council in accessing accurate information and data that is critical to the county council's case. There's concern that there may well have been some incorrect conclusions that have been made because there wasn't that preliminary discussions with the district and borough councils. In addition, I think it would have been helpful that the preliminary discussions would have engaged the district and borough councils more in the process, and there may well have been a more united front with regard to the most appropriate case for a unitary proposal that we can all Leicestershire together. And moving on from the early engagement with the district and borough councils equally, perhaps even greater, that there ought to have been engagement with the Leicestershire members of Parliament. It's accepted, I think, that the County Council does have a real issue, that there isn't an appetite amongst the MPs to afford any parliamentary support for a unitary authority for Leicestershire. We now know that the Secretary of State has spelled out new government policy which has effectively stopped any forced unitary reorganisation. And I listened carefully to what Nick said at the beginning of this matter on the agenda, and there may well be a reality that is starting to appear, that there is no appetite at this stage for progress at the parliamentary level. It is entirely a matter of the timing of when the proposals are to be rested, as it were. I know that some commentators, in view of the opposition that has been made to the current proposals, that they've described the proposals as being a bit of a dead duck. I appreciate some people have responded to that by saying it's not quite a dead duck yet. My view on that is probably mortally wounded at this stage, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. I would ask the Scrutiny Commission if it intends to proceed with the work to ensure you do get a hearing, not just from the authorities that have found success with implementing a unitary authority, but those that have also suffered some real difficulties and challenges from moving to unitary authorities. And I'm sure you'll take that on board and hear from representatives of, for example, Cheshire and Shropshire. I want to turn next to something which I refer to as the democratic deficit, which is offered particularly if a single unitary authority is to be proceeded with. I mean, if established, it will be serving a population of some 690,000 residents. It would be by some distance the largest non-metropolitan unitary authority that currently exists. It will be serving a largely rural and dispersed community, which will bring its own concerns as to accessibility. An organisation of this proposed size would inevitably face issues about being too large and too remote to maintain a connection with smaller communities. I understand that even Birmingham has had recently offloaded its social care into a trust because of problems with scale. Matter for you, but again, you may want to hear further from Birmingham about those issues of scale that they've encountered. And I gather from the papers that a response may well be to establish area committees who will be tasked to deliver local services. Those area committees will need their own buildings, their own back office support staff, so why go to the expense and the disruption of introducing area committees in this reorganisation when you already have the district and borough councils effectively delivering locally now. Some may suggest it doesn't really make great sense. Further, the unitary proposals seek to establish town councils where currently there are none, such as in Market Harbour, Loughborough, Melton, Hinckley. Again, more recurring expenses, more councillors, more buildings, more back office staff to support those councils. There really does need to be a good scrutiny of those additional costs. And those are costs that will be recurring costs as well. Parish councils appear to be burdened with new work under the unitary model. Discussions with parishes, certainly within Harborough, have highlighted that they are not in favour of these proposals, and if anything, they find the Leicestershire County Council too remote now, let alone what they may have to deal with a much larger organisation. At the Harborough District Council annual parish meeting last month, the feedback from 80 parish councillors was overwhelmingly against the proposals, and they raised issues such as time, capacity, qualification and financial resources. So please, again, ensure that you do take the views of the parishes in the scrutiny process. And that leads on to how the new authority will have confidence that it will attract the best qualified members to join the new authority. There will be fewer members doing more work, and it is for a proposed basic allowance of £15,000. Is that a realistic ambition? Is it possible to share the evidence that demonstrates that suggestion will bring added value to the unitary authority? There needs to be more consideration of the strategic need across the East Midlands strategic need to consider the East Midlands situation rather than just trying to replicate the West Midlands. The proposal seems to be more about bolting existing services together than truly transforming services and considering how we can deliver services more effectively. We want to work with our communities to ensure that services are provided in the best way, tailored to local needs, local services for local people through local democracy. We value our parishes and we want to work with them. Now, I appreciate that I did say a little earlier, slightly tongue-in-cheek, that you may well be dealing with a mortally wounded duck here. But it is an opportunity, I think, that we're now all engaged in. And I would ask that the County Council do consider carefully working with district and borough councils on functional reform, devolving services to achieve savings, yet you are still able to retain that vital local connection. Let's work together to achieve the best delivery of services for the residents here in Leicestershire. Thank you very much for your patience.
Okay, Mike, would you like to make your statement?
Thank you. So I'm going to carry on, and but first I want to just re-emphasise the point that Neil made at the start, and that is the disappointment that we have as district leaders that we weren't consulted on the work that was being undertaken to start off with, and that that work was just presented to us as here is an option going forward. I find that disappointing, particularly when you look at the work that we do as authorities working together, and there are numerous examples around the county we've done that, not least of which with the strategic growth plan, which my council endorsed last week, although not unanimously. Thanks, David. So it is disappointing that we weren't engaged, and also that it seems to be one or two options have been put forward, and it was made if we want to put something else on the table, then we should look at that ourselves. So there seems to be a gap in what was looked at. As you are aware, district councils have spoken with MPs. MPs have had meetings with Change Brokenshire, and we have stopped any work that we were doing and looking at alternative structures and structural reform. What we are committed to do is working together, and will include working with the county council, if the county council want to join us in that, to come up with collaboration models and ways that we can deliver services better across the county. What I do want to do, though, is turn to some of the financial numbers that have been presented, because we seem to have been presented with a model that will save £30 million. with very little regard to looking at other options of how £30 million might be saved. And I would hope that Scrutiny will look into the numbers in quite some detail and look at what the gaps are as well. Some of the information that was presented in the latest financial update and the models on the savings reveals some interesting numbers and also some interesting thoughts on how the council might move forward. So £30 million saving, but in order to equalise the council tax at the lowest level, 8 million of that would go in council tax reductions to everywhere in the county apart from Hinckley and Bosworth. Neil's already mentioned the lack of information about the costs for town and parish councils. I know recently, as an example, County Council asked parishes if they would be interested in putting snow wardens in place, which may be something that, because they're closer to their area and parish councils and town councils know the streets better, that it might be something that was worth doing. But they were offered £6 something per hour for every hour that somebody works, so below the minimum wage. So that means if the councils are going to pay to employ somebody to do that snow warden role, then it's going to be additional costs on the parish councils. The only way they can get that money is to raise the precept. And that's the concern of parish councils and town councils around Hinckley and Bosworth in terms of transfer of services to them. They do not see that they would get fully funded the cost of those services. Some of them don't have the capacity to take on those services, and some of them believe that they would just end up having to increase precept in order to cover that as a cost, an additional cost to their residents. There are some interesting numbers in the financial summary around costs of staff. And again, I would encourage Scrutiny to look at these costs and see whether there are other options for saving money at the county council rather than trying to disband everything. So there's figures in the financial numbers about the costs of directors in the borough council and district councils compared to county councils. And the report makes the point that there are 25 directors across the district councils and the cost of those, and obviously numbers of directors could be reduced in a unitary. 7 directors at Leicestershire County Council. The cost of those directors at Leicestershire County Council average £171,000 a year. In the district councils, they average £111,000 a year. So there is an option that the county council could look at reducing costs of directors' costs to save money. For staff earning over £50,000 a year, there are similar differences in pay. And across the councils as a whole, Leicestershire County Council pay their staff an average of £8,000 a year more than district and borough councils. What they don't do is do that at obviously the lower grades. So where people are earning close to living wage, you find very little difference between district and borough councils and the county council. So it's as you get up the hierarchy, numbers of managers increase, numbers of people paid more than 50,000 are higher as a percentage of numbers employed, and the costs of those are also higher. There's no analysis in the numbers about harmonisation of pay and benefits, and obviously in a unitary council you may find that people that are currently performing a role at a borough council have the same are producing work of equal value to the same as in the county council, but they may be paid differently. You may even find differences across the districts and borough councils. So there's nothing in there about harmonising that. There's nothing in the report about where the remaining £22 million saving would be spent and which services would be improved. there's lots of assumptions that by making things bigger and putting things together, they will run better. But we don't believe that that is necessarily the case, and there's very little hard facts in there in terms of output measures and outcomes that would be that we would see to be improved. So the whole report seems to be about saving the 30 million, not about saving the not about improving services to a certain level. 30 million as a proportion of the county council cost is about 4% of spend, and you could freeze increases for 1 year and you would make that money up. So the salary increases and the contract increases that you've got in your budget at the moment and in your MTFS, if you've held those for a year, 2 at most, you would save that 30 million. You wouldn't have to restructure, you wouldn't have to do anything. There's a lot being made about changing the number of councillors. Neil's already mentioned things about the fact that there's nothing in there to include what increased numbers of parish councillors or town councillors would be needed, even if people wanted it. We undertook a recent survey in Hinckley and Bosworth. Over 2,000 people responded, which is far more than responded to the strategic growth plan. 85% of those people want to see Hinckley and Bosworth retained as their local council. And that was across the borough. It was slightly lower when you get up to Ratby and Groby, but the percentages across the borough were above 80%, and in some cases over 85% when you got down to location. So people do want to see the borough councils retained, and there are opportunities for doing that. There's also very little mention of collaborative working in the reports. There is a little bit, but actually we work collaboratively across the piece. We work, for instance, in Hinckley and Bosworth, we work with Blaby on our crime partnership. So we don't just sit in isolation all doing our own thing. We have partnerships for revs and benefits. We contract with other district and borough councils on IT services, and there are numerous examples of the districts and boroughs and the county working together, particularly around things like strategic growth plan, as I've mentioned, light bulb project, and we want to continue that and see no reason to stop that. So if you drill down into every little bit of the financial information, we believe there are gaps in the evidence. There are in almost every case. I even noticed that there was some reference to the size of a unitary authority compared to the likes of Dunelm and some of the biggest companies in the county. They are pretty different organisations to a county council. They have to make profit, and they also have different pay structures. So I looked at Dunelm just out of interest. Turnover in 2018, £1 billion, so that would be about the same as the new unitary if that was brought forward, but profit of about 140 million, down from last year. 6,500 full-time equivalents, that would be about the same as a unitary council, but with average pay of only £23,800 a year, significantly below what a unitary council would have. So it's all right to put these glib numbers out and use them as an argument, but actually you've got to look at what's being reported. Out of interest, I also looked at how much cash Dunelm hold. It's about 15 million on £1 billion turnover company, and they have about 140 million of borrowing. I think, again, significantly different to where districts and county council are at the moment and where you would expect the starting point for a unitary to be. And that to me says there is scope for doing different things and for looking at this in a different way, not necessarily through structural reform, just changing the way that we do things. From a service delivery point of view, I've already said that I don't think there's very much in there to talk about improved outcomes. And that doesn't matter whether it's in education, where recent report that looked at the changes in funding to education, the things that were missing were linking the different parts of education funding to outcomes. And I think that's the same with this proposal that's before us at the moment. So lots of proposed changes structurally to free up money, but very little in terms of what those outcomes would be achieved and how those outcomes would be enhanced for the people who need them. There are a few other things in the report that perhaps again could be looked at and questioned by the panel in terms of whether the detail is right. Statements, for instance, about trading standards officers carrying out food safety inspections might be possible, but there are different powers for both of those communities. Leicester City, for instance, still have separate trading standards and environmental health for that reason, that it is difficult to get people to do the training that is required to be able to carry out both of those functions. So, and I think there are assumptions in the report that everything seems to say it's going to be better if we do this unitary, better if we do this unitary, but there's no measures to say how that would be better. Going back to the costs, there is a bit in there about council tax and what would happen under harmonisation, and as I say, that's an £8 million giveaway, but of no benefit to people in Hinckley and Bosworth, because we're already the lowest council tax in the county. But there's also little in terms of assumptions around other charging and fee setting mechanisms. So there is nothing in the report about car parking, for instance, what levels of car parking would be set. There's something in the report that points out that districts and borough councils have different charging mechanisms for collecting garden waste. That varies from, I think, at current rates, either zero in northwest Leicestershire to I think about £54 it's going to be in Melton. In Hinckley and Bosworth we charge £24. We would be really interested to know, and my residents would be interested to know, is the assumption in the numbers based on that fee being set across the county at £24 or at £54 or at zero or something different. So one of the reasons that we introduced those charges was because the county council saved money by withdrawing the grants that were given to districts and borough councils. So we've taken the hit. So if we take 30 million out, does that mean we then go back to free garden waste collection? There's nothing in there to say that. Do our residents pay nothing for car parking, which is the case in Oadby and Wigston, I believe, or do they pay different rates? And how would a unitary authority determine what those rates are? Because we base it in Hinckley and Bosworth on economic need, what we need to do to get people into the town centre, and we flex our parking rates based on that. It won't be as easy for a unitary to come up with a single system for car parking across the county. So everywhere you look at those services being merged and put together under a unitary, there are questions, and questions that remain unanswered. One of the biggest service emissions is around council housing. Several of the district and borough councils, my own included, we have 3,400 council homes. I don't know what assumptions have been included in making savings in the numbers around council tenant rents. Will they be harmonised across the county? Will council houses be sold off? There's nothing in the report around what the county council sees happening in that area under a unitary authority. That is a concern not just to officers at the council, but also to the 3,500 families that live in our council homes. Many of them are on income support or benefits of some description to pay for those houses. And yet, one of the major changes that's being proposed to bring all these councils together, and the reports are almost silent on what would happen with council housing. So I think there are huge gaps, and I think there are other ways that the council could have looked at saving money. For me, one of the biggest issues, though, is the fact that we're doing this, that the county council is doing this seemingly in isolation. When the proposal was announced, there was also an announcement that we were looking at a strategic alliance across the East Midlands. I do not believe that single unitaries can work without in Leicestershire in isolation. I struggle to see how they would work across the East Midlands at the size that's being proposed here. And I know that Derbyshire have looked at unitary, Nottinghamshire are looking at it, Leicestershire are looking at it. And I don't know whether there's any discussion gone on with the city councils and the existing unitaries that are out there as well. There is one area that I've heard mentioned, I'm not sure whether it's in the report or just in a statement. There are some models out there that actually I could see working in the East Midlands, but they rely on us having a strong East Midlands government of some sort, whether that's a combined authority, whether it's a regional body with elected members. But we have to have a debate across the East Midlands about what we want to be. I read lots about envy as to what funding gets put into the West Midlands, and yet one of the biggest problems in the East Midlands is that we don't seem to be able to pull together and come up with not what we want, but what we should be doing for local residents. What are the priorities? And unless we do that, it's just funding envy as far as what we see from the West Midlands. It's funding envy as far as what we see from other councils being funded. And we actually have to sit down and think about what it is that we want to do across the East Midlands. When you look at places where they have higher level authority supported by unitary structures, I do have some sympathy for that approach. And I've actually seen mentioned in county council papers the likes of Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, even London as examples. But they are not coming at it from a bottom-up approach. In Scotland, you have a national government. Wales, you have a national government of sorts. In London, you've got the GLA. And then they are supported by unitary councils that represent defined communities. And the difference in size is something that we see across Leicestershire already. So the difference, for instance, and apologies for calling it Leicestershire, but Rutland has is a unitary with about the same size as Melton Council. Leicester City Council, biggest unitary in the East Midlands, about 400,000 people. If you go to our other cities in the East Midlands, large unitaries, urban areas, close-knit communities representing large urban areas. When you get to the other models that you see in Scotland, for instance, you can have communities as small as the Orkneys, where the unitary council represents 22,000 people. So the drive to go to a 700,000 massive unitary takes away that community focus. So if you look at the unitary structures in Scotland, I think they're about 32, 34, similar in Wales. They are based around communities and distinct communities. So for me, if you're going to implement a unitary structure anywhere in the East Midlands, A, you have to look at what we need to be doing in the East Midlands, and then B, you have to look at what the communities are. You will not get a successful community-based unitary structure in Leicestershire by trying to tell everybody that they're being managed under the same umbrella. They are different communities and they need to be supported locally by local democracy and local councils. That's what we've found in Hinckley and Bosworth. That's what people want. They want to remain with that local council. So it's disappointing that we've been presented with an option. There are multiple options out there that could be brought into consideration as well, and there are also multiple ways of saving money without actually going. And the county council could choose to close down and reopen as a new council with people reapplying for their jobs at lower pay, say 30 million. So there are lots of different ways of doing it. County council's chosen to go on one route. I think there is very little support from MPs, from government, from district borough councils and from members of the public. It is a duck waiting to die, if not a dead duck. And I think the sooner we can start working together and talking about the other options, the better.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I'm going to open it up for questions from members now. I thought Nick will want to respond to some of that, and then I'll get some of the issues being raised. I think I'm sure members will get an officer view just on how they see some of those points. But let's open it up for questions. Kat, I know it's not your responsibility, but do you accept that the county council is in an extremely difficult financial situation in terms of the government grant? Well, we probably won't have any government grant from next year. We'll just be completely reliant on council tax business rates and charging for services, depending whether they press ahead with this negative RSG. The situation every year just becomes more and more difficult. My impression is there is an understanding of that amongst district councils and district members, but it's probably not at the level it needs to be to help this kind of debate. Because if you look at, we're not Northamptonshire, but you know what's happened there, and there are other county councils, Somerset, that have literally said they're on the edge of the cliff. So we do have to think about, if the government isn't going to provide more money, whatever government that is, what we can do ourselves at a local level to address this, because I think there's general acceptance that we will reach the point, unless something's done, that we won't be in a position to deliver statutory services. And of course the two big ones are adult social care and children's social care. So I just, the drivers, one of the drivers, I mean, the leader will speak for himself because there are other drivers, but the financial situation facing the county council is very, very serious, very severe, and that is one reason I think this is having to be explored and looked at. But I just wanted to explore with you. You've been on the receiving end of a number of cuts. You mentioned the removal of the credits. The dry recycling credits are gone. Green recycling credits have gone. There will be an impact of some of the children's centres funding being withdrawn, where that's done in conjunction with the district, the services run in conjunction with the district council. So the districts have been on the receiving end of some of this, but there could be more to come unless we come up with a way of making the county council financially sustainable. So I just wanted to get your view on that. Do you think there's an understanding of that, both by members and senior officers at district level?
Thank you, Simon. Yes, I think that there is a clear understanding at district borough council level about the huge financial challenges that the county council faces. And I think it is with that level of understanding and appreciation that I think gives impetus really to the need to sit down with district borough councils for collaborative work to be considered. Now, it may be that the county councils has the monopoly of wisdom about how to achieve the savings, but I would have hoped that, as it were, by spreading the need to have discussion about how are we going to achieve these savings that have got to come. There can be a variety of ways that should be explored in order to achieve those savings. And Mike has alluded to some examples of that. But you began your question about, well, you think that district and borough councils have some understanding. I think anybody who has, in a leadership role in a local authority has a deep understanding about financial challenges is affecting us at district and borough council, and we certainly are aware of what the challenges are at county.
Okay, anything to add, Mike?
Yeah, just by way of examples, really. So one of the things that we have had to do as a borough council is take the £5 increase on council tax every year, and because we have special expenses, it doesn't really work out at £5. But we've done that for the last 3 years. We'll do it again next year, and we've put council tax up. And I know recently county has started doing the same. But if we increase our council tax by 2%, it generates about £80,000 extra a year for us. If the county increased by 2%, it generates about £800,000 a year extra from Hinckley and Bosworth. If you add on to that increase in the tax base in terms of number of properties being built, that's probably another half on top of that again. So Hinckley and Bosworth have seen council tax increase by round about £150,000 a year for the borough element, but for the county element in the same time, council tax take from our residents has gone up by about £2 million a year because of the social care precept as well. So you can see that element for us has been very small. We had to introduce a charge for garden waste collection, and that's fine. So our residents have accepted that. We have very high take up, and they've taken that. We are doing all we can to promote business to come to the borough and grow in the borough. That's very slow, doesn't give a phenomenal amount of business rates increase to us, but it gives us a little bit. We've had to look at all of our reserves and see whether we can use those and restructure those, and we continue to do that to address the challenges. Our RSG next year will go down to 0, same as county councils. We're currently sitting on a MTFS that's balanced for 5 years, and that's because we've taken tough decisions to charge people for things that we didn't charge before, to increase council tax to the maximum that we're allowed without going to a referendum, and to accept as much housing growth as developers can build in the area. And we've had to do those things. Now, I know some of those things don't contribute to in the same way that the county does, but the council tax take has gone up across the county, and it goes up much faster than it does at the boroughs.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan Morgan.
turn my button on, if nothing else. Really, a question about obviously the principle of unitary. I mean, I know, Mike, you obviously in your borough decided to take a motion, I think, through your council about looking at unitary based on your current boundaries. And I appreciate you touched on some of those issues in relation to other parts of the UK as far as how different sizes and different structures of unitaries actually work elsewhere. Obviously in England, the Secretary of State has been pretty consistent, both the current one and also the previous one, about what they perceive the sort of minimum base level of new unitaries in this country to be, and they've talked about substantially more than 300,000, which I think most commentators seem to take as being 300,000 plus 10%, or thereabouts, as being the base level, so 330,000 as being the base. And you touched on, obviously, Birmingham. I think you, Neil, touched on the fact that obviously Birmingham is a million people there, plus or minus, and I think likewise has been widely commented on as being possibly too large to control effectively. But again, it's a metropolitan area and it's very different. So given we have a sort of a base level as far as England's concerned, and again, putting aside Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, unless we saw Leicestershire up and helicopter off to somewhere else, we are stuck with being in England. And I was going to say, I suddenly saw them all flushing along there, so thank you very much, Rosita. And so I'm just interested because obviously it's something that you've actually considered yourself, Mike, I know in particular, and I'm assuming, Neil, that the discussions have been had in the past year. And really just interested to know, you must have both considered the prospect of what's happening elsewhere. Dorset has recently been agreed, and those two unitaries carved out of the county of Dorset are both roughly about 400,000. You've got Bucks, which is 400 and something thousand. You've got the two Northamptonshires, which are I think just under 400,000. But in truth, has anyone actually done any work on considering what is to be an effective level if the government has actually set a floor at 300,000 plus whatever is considered to be a safe level, argument's sake, 330,000, and an upper level, which is Birmingham, which is a metropolitan area, is obviously you've commented on. So really just answering that, truthfully, what from all the points you've made, what do you actually consider to be an appropriate level?
So in terms of has anybody done that analysis for Leicestershire, I don't think that has been looked at in that respect. I think the problem with all of these options is it's looking at the cost of running a council. It's not looking at the delivery of services to a community, which is what district and borough councils do well. I think the evidence, if you do look at those areas where they have models that seem to work, be it Wales or Scotland or London, they are built around pretty much around communities. So London boroughs, unitaries, vary in size between I think about 150,000 and 300,000, but they are tight communities, dense populations and large numbers. And I know there's questions going on about whether economically they work, but when you get to the likes of Scotland and Wales, they are definitely built around communities. And you have, I think Merthyr Tydfil's the smallest in Wales, 66,000 population. And when you get up to the largest in Cardiff, around 200,000 again. So that variation can work, and it can work for different communities. I think what one way to perhaps look at some of the changes, though, is not to look at the structural changes and look at what we can do at boroughs and districts. I think there's a lot of work that we could do on behalf of the county council that would take cost out of the system by running it locally. And I think that's the downside of a unitary in that if you pull everything together, the costs may go up of delivering something, whereas actually if you devolve the work down, which I know is part of what's being suggested for parish and town councils, then you could have those services delivered more cheaply. I think we can do that within the existing structure. But if we were to go to unitary structures and you were to ask districts to take on most of the work of the county council, but let's take the broadest example, that 7 districts become 7 unitaries and take on all that work, there would be some things that we would still categorically collaborate on. Would it make sense to split adult social care down into 2, even if 2 or 7? Even if you went for 2 unitaries, you might find some way of continuing to work on that service together. What doesn't seem to be have been looked at, because we're looking at different services here between districts and boroughs and county, what doesn't seem to have been looked at is, well, why aren't Leicestershire, Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire working together on adult social care? Why aren't they working together on children's services to reduce the costs across that level of government, rather than try to take cost out of another level of government? So I think those things are there, but I don't believe there is a bit of guidance can be offered on financial basis, but I do not think it can be offered on a community basis, and that to me is the right structure, the right way to determine what size government should be.
Okay, thank you. Terry Inan. Oh, you wanted to add something? Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Jonathan. Harborough District Council did get involved in commissioning some work about looking at unitaries. Commissioned Grant Thornton to do a piece of work for us last year. And they came back with several models. Single unitary authority, the feedback was too large, too remote. 2 unitaries, north-south for Leicestershire, east-west Leicestershire, 3 unitary, and even looked at the model of 7 district unitaries. And you have to be open-minded about the concept of a unitary. I think residents probably would be very positive about having the sort of single point of contact with regard to who's going to cut the open spaces, who's going to collect the waste, and why we've got a different tip that's run by somebody else and not your authority. So one can see advantages, but that also opens up the question about a number of those roles can probably be done now, the sort of functional reform. And we really ought to explore that, particularly in light of the current climate that Nick referred to, and we all appreciate, that there just isn't the parliamentary support currently for local government reform. So we've had to put that piece of work on the shelf, and we are looking at how we can best deliver services more efficiently, but locally, by using devolution or functional reform.
Terry Inan.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you both for coming, because I think this has been a really useful session, and thank you for making the effort to put such a detailed critique of the proposals together. And I like the way that you kind of modelled the thinking for us between structural reform and functional reform, and this is in my background in the NHS. We've had multiple structural reforms, and the King's Fund have pointed out that they often don't achieve what we hoped for. So thinking about functional reform, as Simon Galton has pointed out, we've got a serious problem with the future funding of adult social care. Forgive me if I got this wrong, but I got the impression that some of the solutions proposed were to cut staff and contractor remuneration and to increase customer-facing charges. So I'm not sure that's something that we would find that acceptable. Like the light bulb project, though, I followed through this council, and Ernie White, bless him, was a great proponent of that. But I also know that was extremely hard work to do, to actually get that level of customer-facing integration on a key social service. So those are my comments, but coming to more of a kind of a practical point, and this came up at our full council meeting yesterday, where Mr. Charles had made a very good point about the idea of area committees and highways and planning. And that for me is very much a customer focused issue. And in my patch, there's been at least 3 cases that I can just reel off where a failure to get highways and planning to talk to each other and the parish council and the people has caused huge problems. And you're saying that with functional reform, we could achieve something like the vision that we've certainly had from Durham and Wiltshire of area committee type modelling, where little decisions about planning and highways are actually made together by a bunch of councillors, decision makers, unitary councillors obviously in their case. What is therefore stopping us? And there must be something, because we haven't done it and highways forums have disappeared. What is stopping us from devolving and integrating those kinds of decisions now? Because if we're going for functional reform, we're going to need a way of achieving, I think, what the public want from us, which is much better integrated and cost-effective public services around those kind of things that affect their every day-to-day existence.
I mean, let you answer that. This has come out key from the evidence that we've taken from the councils that have done this, that they've all said that one of the things you've got to do is set up a localised decision making for a range of services. You can't run everything out of a unitary county. You've got to have some, and they've done it in various ways, but some have done it with parishes, so they have parish members and unitary members, but there is a problem with parish members voting, so they can't have delegated powers, which I think is a problem. But I just wanted to be aware of that is their solution to the problem, that they've set up, in Wiltshire's case, 18 area committees which have a budget and get on with it. So Terry's point is, why can't we do that now? But I'm just interested in your reaction. Do you need a unitary to do that?
I think you can do some of that now. You could do it tomorrow, and I think that's probably part of the debate that we need to have. I think you've already got those regional bodies out there already that could take decisions, and they're called district and borough councils. You could quite easily, if I look at the cost of county services, you look at things like that. Highways, I think districts and boroughs used to operate highways, could easily look at doing some of that again. Cultural, environmental and planning services, actually we do most of the planning work at the moment anyway. We could quite easily take that on. Public health, some regulatory stuff, you've got a load of things captured under other services. Yeah, we could do a lot of that already, but what we would do, whereas some of these services at the moment are shared out. Some parishes do grass cutting, some boroughs do their own grass cutting. Yes, we could do that, but then I think what you would find is that certain boroughs and districts would then work together collaboratively to do that. And it doesn't matter, we don't have to be neighbours to do that. We've shown that with the Revs and Benefits Partnership. We show it with IT services. We operate those across districts where it makes sense for us to do that, and not necessarily because we're neighbours. I would just like to pull out though on the adult social care. So cost of county services 2017-18, gross spending 236.5 million, net cost 154 million. In 2018-19, 244 million gross, so an increase of about 8 million, but 152.5 million net, so a reduction in the net cost of adult social care of 2 million. And then the adult social care precept went on council tax as well, which was what, 4%? So I don't know how much that raised. So you've actually seen a reduction in the cost, in the net cost to the county council, and a significant increase in income through council tax precept as well. So if the forecast is that that is continuing to grow and that the net cost will grow, then at least you can start looking to manage that. But that is the area where I don't see why the county is not talking with partners in Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, Northamptonshire, Lincolnshire. There's no reason why you couldn't look for some synergies across those different authorities. Because all we can do is do prevention. All we can do is help people not to need that adult social care in some ways. And we do that, I know, with support of funding from County Council in some respects for adaptations and things like that. So we can be the implementers of it, but we don't have all the funding at the moment. But from my point of view, I would happily take on a lot of these smaller services. Everything that is in the unitary proposal about passing down to parishes and town councils could come to districts. We might run it differently. It may be appropriate to have some of those go to parishes anyway, but you can do that now. You don't have to form a unitary council to do it. What you could do would be to get the county council concentrating on the things that it really does have to deliver itself, and that it is really best placed to deliver itself. And I think there's a lot in here that you could strip out and work with districts to make it be delivered locally and perhaps more cost effectively as well.
Neil?
Thank you, Simon, and I echo and endorse what Mike has said. Terry, I think that was an incredibly good question. What is stopping us doing that functional reform now? I've asked that question myself, and the answer has been, well, it hasn't happened yet, so why do you think it should happen? But the counter argument to that, I think, is, hang on a minute, the County Council proposal on unitaries sets out this aspiration, the aspiration to bring the single delivery service to our residents. So if the County Council sets out the aspiration and the district councils are expressing the willingness to embrace functional reform, let's get on with it. You do not need all the interruption and the millions spent on setting up a single unitary authority to deliver that functional reform. There is that willingness across the piece, and now we have expressed in the County Council documents that aspiration. So it's time the two got together.
Are you aware of any examples where that's been done that we could look at? Is there anywhere else in the country that's gone down that road?
I don't have any specific examples around the country as to doing that, but let's explore it, because I think we all know in our own localities that we all have experience of residents getting confused about who's delivering what services. I live in Lutterworth, and in Lutterworth the grass cutting of the open spaces is done by the town council, the district council and the county council, and that causes all sorts of confusion. Why, for heaven's sake, can't one provider cut all the open spaces in Lutterworth? Is that sort of simple example? And I've alluded again to the districts collect waste, but they have to take it to a county tip, which is controlled and charged by a different mechanism. Again, that's a sort of example that should be, in my view, delivered by a single provider.
Thank you. Bill Bolter.
Thanks, Chair. Most of my questions have been answered already. I was going to ask what services could be devolved down to the district. And Nick made the statement yesterday that the County Council in the past has had a not very happy relationship with the districts, and that drawn services back into the centre. I talk about highway forums and other forums that they had there, and they've drawn them back to the centre. I did say that things will have to change on the unit structure. You've admitted this morning that districts would be prepared to take some things on, so perhaps Nick could reconsider the County Council position and talk to the districts about what they could take on sooner rather than later without a great deal of changing the structures. But you also mentioned parish councils, and we had the Association of Parish Councils here at the beginning, the first meeting, and we did ask them about their opinions, and their opinion was they were quite happy about a unity structure. Then we drilled down into when the unitary authority came here, the difficulty is getting parish councillors, and they all said they had great difficulty having parish councillors, and very often it was unelected. They were just nominated to the parish councils. So that doesn't seem a very sensible way forward. If we can't get parish councillors, there's little point devolving the power to them if they can't spend the money because they're not elected. So there's a difficulty there. And I don't know how you gentlemen found parish councillors in your areas. Can you get parish councillors, or have you got difficulty getting them as well?
Thank you, Bill. In respect to the first part of your question, I'm delighted that Nick has accepted an invitation to come and meet and talk with the district and borough council leaders, and that meeting has been arranged in Melton on the 21st of December.
Can I just clarify, because I think this is really important, whatever, how often do you lot meet? I mean, I don't know. There used to be fairly regular meetings of the district leaders and the county leader. When did you last meet?
It's been quite some time since we all got round together. Was it the early part of this year? So this will be the second time.
You wouldn't describe them as regular meetings?
I would not.
Would you welcome that?
Absolutely.
Okay, I think that's helpful.
Can I just answer Bill's second part of the question about the parish councils? And I think, Bill, you're absolutely right to want to drill down into that. I made reference to it in my opening statement about the annual parish meeting that we had in Harborough, and we got the feedback from the 80 parish councillors that attended. But going around the tables and talking to them, and they were raising these issues about not only capacity, but we got the people to do the work now, let alone if there are going to be additional responsibilities for them. But they were saying, I'm not sure that we've got the time to do it. I'm not sure if we've got the people to do it, and I'm not sure even if we've got the people that they're properly qualified to be able to oversee the sort of work that needs to be done. So the real issues, and in terms of sending out surveys or whatever, I thought an annual parish meeting where you're talking to 80 parish councils on your patch, that is the best anecdotal feedback that you can rely on.
Do you want to add something?
Yeah, just to add a little bit to that. I sit on a parish council. I'm a parish councillor in Burbage. It's one of the biggest parish councils in the country. Annual spend of about £600,000, and we employ, I think it's 8 full-time staff. Now, what you'd be looking at with some of the smaller parish councils at the moment, they're largely run by volunteers. Councillors are volunteers, so nobody gets allowances. You might get some full-time staff, but actually a lot of parish councillors are also people that work in the community. If you're asking them to do more, they will all be in a position where they will have to go out and employ people to do certain things if you were to devolve things down. Some parishes will be able to do that, but actually I think you'll be looking at very few. It will be the larger ones, it will be the larger parish and town councils, but the smaller parish and parish councils will not be able to cope with the capacity. And I've seen letters from various parish councils that have been sent in reply to some of the consultations that's going on at the moment. They are not in favour of it. They're not in favour of it.
Okay. Ted Parton.
Thank you. The first question is for the gentleman for Hinckley and Bosworth, please. Would you be so kind as to restate and explain what you'd said earlier on? I did actually write this down, so I would appreciate some clarification. and if I've misquoted you, please correct me. But what you meant when you said that Leicestershire County Council could cease to exist, reform, and offer staff the opportunity to reapply for their jobs on the lowest salary, which would generate the £30 million savings. Is that what you actually said?
It is what I said. I don't know whether practically that could work, but effectively, if you were trying to restructure some companies, you might take that approach, i.e., you need people to apply for jobs. You restructure.
I'll get an
the
officer
county,
view
and then
on the
do that.
practicalities and the likely consequences of doing that, because like the district councils, we have to employ people on grades, and there is a whole process which I can't remember the name of, but I'm sure the officer. Pardon? The HAY, yes, that's it. Job evaluation, which everyone goes through, and that comes out with a grade, and that's what we have to pay. And I rather think, you mentioned getting the views of the unions, and I think that's a really good idea. I think we should do that. But I rather think we might have industrial action on our hands if we went down that route. But I'll get an officer response on that in a bit. Sorry, you would like an answer?
I just need to continue the point, please, because that is I'm acutely aware that we don't want to cause distress to employees of district councils when we're talking about unitary proposals, that that they're worried about their jobs. I just think that raising the option of that could also create equal panic to the employees of Leicestershire County Council, given that there are media in this room. My second question is that I can see that you're both accomplished leaders, and I fully appreciate your leadership, and I want to be very clear that I'm not in any way whatsoever questioning your leadership abilities. So that must be made completely clear. I'm not questioning it, but there is a there is a school of thought in some forms of leadership that rather than focusing on the problem and who caused the problem to get us here, we now need to focus on, well, what are we going to do now? And I know that in the both of your statements, you had expressed disappointment with the county council. Look at that. That's leadership. Thank you very much. You had expressed disappointment with the county council that there were various mechanisms you felt you hadn't been consulted on. But putting that aside, what are you actually physically doing now? I.e., what did you do yesterday? What are you planning on doing today? Tomorrow is Friday. What are you planning on doing tomorrow to engage with Leicestershire County Council to talk about these proposals? What is actually physically happening?
Ed, can I just... Yeah, I'll get them to answer that. One of the things I think, possibly because you've come on the last meeting, there's been a lot of correspondence. There's been several exchanges of letters between the district leaders and Nick. The last of which was one from Richard Blunt. Am I right? That was the last one, wasn't it, on the 7th of November? Raising similar sorts of issues about the need to talk and meet. And you've now agreed to that, haven't you, Nick? That's gonna take place, and there is a date for that, isn't there, that you referred to? So I know it's difficult when you come in part way through a process and you're raising some valid points, which I'll ask them to answer. But that there is quite a bit of history on that in terms of going toing and throwing, and the need to sit round the table and try and, because it's got to be done at that level in the end.
Chair, it seems as if from your earlier question that they haven't actually sat round the table.
Not to date, but there is a commitment to do so, and let's hope it will be the first of several.
This is a very serious issue, and to think that we've not sat round the table already.
Personally, I agree with you that local government as a whole in Leicestershire must be suffering because the 7 district council leaders and the leader of the largest authority has only met once this year, and we're nearly at the end of it. So, I agree with you on that. Let's get some reaction from. Do you want to start, Mike?
Yes.
Sorry, Mike.
So, just to clarify on that, the once or maybe twice this year formally has been meetings between districts and the county leader. District leaders do meet more frequently than that to go through other things and collaboration meetings, etc. I just want to go back to the point about, can you close the county down and restructure? Yeah, I think you can do that. I didn't say that in order to instill panic, and I don't want that to be taken as that. But what I was trying to make the point was there are other options for saving money. And other councils have done things where they've imposed pay cuts with union support because it was either that or it was something worse, and pay freezes, etc. So there are other options that you can look at, and I know some elements of that may have already been looked at, but when you compare salaries in the county council compared to salaries in the district councils, they are different, and there is an £8,000 per person average difference. So it must be an area that you should look at. But yeah, in terms of work and what we're doing, 21st of December we are meeting with Nick, and we will go through where we should go next. And that really is important, and it's something that as district leaders we've said all along, that we want to be engaged, we want to be part of the process, and we see us as being part of the solution as well. And that is important, and hopefully from 21st we can move forward.
Thank you. Anything to add, Neil?
Yes. Ted, good to see you again. And good points that you make. We need to focus on what are we doing now. And I'm very grateful to Nick to agreeing to meet with us. Partnership working is extremely important in this process. And I know that we all, Nick and the 7 district and borough council leaders, will be approaching that meeting in a positive and constructive manner, because we want to ultimately get to meet the challenges that are facing all of us, and we need to explore the best and most efficient way of getting to that result.
I've got 4 more people that want to speak, so we need to sort of wrap this up in about 15 minutes, and I want to get some officer reaction, and I know that Nick will want to respond. So, but we've got 4, so please ask your question as quick as you can. Mr. Harrison, Dan Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, welcome. You've been here a while, but it's welcome from me. I start off by saying how concerned I am about the statement of staff reductions and how we could save 30 million. Frightens me. Obviously, this is broadcasted. It'll be on YouTube tomorrow. So if, we have to handle all of this with great care. And I think statements like that caused a great concern for me sitting here. I don't mean it derogative, it's your statement, sir. But it did cause concern because that was quite detailed, and I don't think that would help people when we're all saying we're concerned about staff, the future and everything. Just to make a statement like that did cause concern from me. The second point is that it's the second year now running that this county council in the upper tier has been awarded the #1 spot for efficiency in how we operate. It's also public knowledge that over the last 8 years we've saved 200 million, and we're now on a 65 million. So we're sitting here looking very seriously. We're not sort of sort of Johnny come lately. We really are, as an authority, experienced in how we're handling our affairs, and we're showing that is nationally recognised in what we do. Now, what I was hoping for, Chairman, is probably some direction. I'm not predetermined, I'm predisposed to a unitary, but I was hoping for a number of months that the districts would turn around and say, this is how we perceive how we might be able to do things. And in a cohesive manner that you could sit and take note of. And I understand all your concerns. But also, I think it's really important to understand that the districts provide 15%, we provide the 85% service delivery. And obviously when we're talking about adult and communities, which is a board I serve on, it's absolutely horrendous, the cost ongoing. And I think all of us, not just at county, it's whether it's the police, the fire brigade, also we're all worried on where we're going to fund all of our business ongoing. So it is with that thought that there has to be a highly significant collaboration, whether it's a unitary as a one or a unitary as two, but I cannot perceive how we can go forward. We've been told, without a shadow of a doubt, by 3 people who came and gave evidence. Durham was Labour, Cornwall Liberal, Wiltshire was Conservative, so it was total across the board. All of them were able to say, without any hesitation, there was very considerable amounts of money made, a surplus, to oppose to what we're doing today. All of them absolutely astounded me, because I came into this thinking about the money, but I was told it's not about the money. The money's a given. It's about how these area committees bring local authority, local democracy to people on a scale that absolutely excited me, and I was delighted at the thought, because I firmly believe in that. So if you're coming from we'd lose democracy, looking at that and listening to those people, it was absolutely amazing. In fact, Durham was appointing each area committee was 100,000. The councils were given another 10 or 15,000 disposable income. It was enriching and encouraging growth. We were told of people turning up, and the 100, 150 people turning up to meetings. You know, it's just so different to what we see and understand at the moment. So my question is simply, is there a way that you could produce a dual, 2 unitaries, if that's, and the feasible case for that? Is it finance? Can you produce facts and figures on how it would operate? Obviously, it's more expensive than a single unitary. This is the whole thing. We have 2.
I think you've made a very good point there. I'm going to take these 4 questions. Could you make some notes and then respond at the end, because we're getting tight on time. Yes. Terry Richardson.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one comment first before I ask my questions. I think it needs to go on record. It's that, you know, were we to go the unitary authority route, all councils will be disbanded. There will be a completely new council, and therefore everybody would have to apply for their job. So, you know, coming back to the point, you know, that is a given if we go in the unitary scenario.
I don't think that's legally the position, having gone through one...
It is, all councils are disbanded.
It is on councils disbanding, but it's not the case that everyone would have to apply for their jobs, because there's a thing called a statutory transfer order, and I will ask the legal officer to clarify that, because I'm just concerned we're getting into areas that might start people worrying. Just hold on a minute, we'll get a legal answer on that.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think it's important not to lose track of the fundamentals in terms of any new authority that's created. The way the law works at the moment is that protection is given to the bulk of staff who need to be employed by a new or continuing authority. So the TUPE rules apply. The only issue that you should be aware of is that with regard to the statutory officers in your authority, that would require some form of open competition. But in terms of all other staff, the law is quite sort of clear. People don't lose their jobs TUPE applies and they move over once they've been matched up. And in terms of if there was to be unitary authority, the lead-in time is given to the new authority or the transition authority to sort out the arrangements with the existing authorities before they're disbanded. So in terms of the history of the previous unitary status changes, there'd be no issue with regard to staff suddenly losing their jobs.
But what if the job's currently done by 2 or 3 people, say in district councils, they're all doing exactly the same job, and the new council only requires 1 post to do that job? What's the position then, Anthony?
Well, the position remains that there would be an exercise done to work out what staff were needed by the new authority in conjunction with the existing authorities. No staff would be treated less favourably as a result of the transfer of undertaking regulations that apply.
If there was a reduction in the number of posts that the new authority deemed necessary to run the function, how do you then fit people in? What is the process?
So HR staff will be involved working through across the, and don't forget this is very hypothetical, so I don't want to be pressed too much on the detail, but I can talk with experience with regard to when Leicester City Council became unitary in 1997 and before then, that it was done in a way that no one was treated less favourably, and if staff weren't required, then they were subject to redundancy provision just as you would be in normal circumstances.
Okay, that's helpful. Terry, sorry, I just wanted to get
thank
that
you.
on the record.
I think that was the point I was saying, that inevitably to make the savings, you've got job losses. You know, my question really comes back to the 3 press comments that all of the 3 leaders have made to us today, in that at this moment in time there is no support for a unitary authority going forward, and therefore, you know, we should be looking at the art of the possible. So what is the view on the art of the possible? Is the art of the possible that we're better off looking at functional reform at this moment in time, working collaboratively as 8 authorities, rather than doing a proposal for a unitary route, and that functional working together on a collaborative basis may then lead into a better structure and shape and understanding of what the new reforms for Leicestershire, because undoubtedly there will be reforms to local authority in Leicestershire, would look like going forward. So are we better going back to the egg rather than starting with the chicken, particularly as we know from what Neil said that there's already some later consultants' information out there about what might be the best structure for Leicestershire going forward.
Okay, we've got that one. Maggie Wright.
Be very quick, really, because I think most of what I was going to say has been said. And I mean, there's been a lot of talk about dead ducks, but I would say defibs are available. It's been really heartening to listen to the 2 leaders, and the positive statements that have come out that I've taken away is the right time to explore opportunities with county and town councils and changing the way we do things. And Nick, as leader, when he started this, he said, I want to start a conversation. And that's exactly what's happened. The conversations have started and they are happening. My question was going to be, how do you see, to the leaders, how do you see this progressing? What mechanism do you suggest to keep the conversations going, and what work would you do? But I think that's probably been answered by the fact that you're looking to the meeting on the 21st of December. But if you can just clarify that in some way. Thank you.
Rosita.
Yes, and I'll follow on where Maggie left off. Yes, we're starting a conversation. I do agree that a detailed finance case, that there are important things like housing and open space that needs to be discussed, but I think there is a too great a focus on minutiae here. And minutiae is something that has to be addressed at a later date. So do district leaders agree that there is a need for creating a skeleton first and a basis on which you can start to discuss, and minutiae come later? And my second point is there is no support towards a unitary structure from our district leaders here. Yet, if I remember rightly, 3 years ago, there was the combined authorities models floated, and all districts raced to sign up to it. Now, it did die a death, but I would like to know how the leaders compare the combined authorities models and why they were so supportive of this model in comparison to a unitary structure.
Okay, thank you. Bill, had you got something you just wanted to quickly come back on, and then I'll get a final reaction?
Sarah's actually took some of my thunder. One of the presentations from the other unitary authorities said that when the new council was in being, all officers had to reapply for the jobs, and there were redundancies. Now, Mr. Cross has pointed out that some officers have got statutory rights and they won't be removed, but others, like the lower down scale, have to apply for the few jobs that will be available. So there will be staff redundancies, and quite a lot of them, if we went down this structure, because what people have to remember, it's not the county council taking over, it's a new authority, which may look at things in an entirely different way. The only way they're going to save money is by reducing staff. And, you know, like any business, unfortunately, that's what happens. So I agree with, for the first time ever, I think, I agree with Terry. I think we're both thinking the same lines, that there will be staff losses.
I'm sure we'll come back to this. We'll get someone on that in one of those seats there to go into this at a later date. Right, gentlemen, which would you like to pick up on those last four questions that have been raised, and then just close up, and then I'll just ask the leader if he'd like to respond.
Okay, thanks, Simon. So just to go back to this issue around pay cuts and restructuring, whether you go for unitary or whether you stay as you are, you have the option to ask people to reduce pay or take redundancies. The getting everybody to reapply for jobs at a lower salary, or some people to apply for new jobs at a lower salary, is effectively enforcing a pay cut. But it's not making redundancies. The only proposal on the table that's suggesting redundancies is the unitary proposal. That's the one that has really spooked officers. I believe that's at county as well, because the numbers have been talked about between 400 and 1,000 redundancies across Leicestershire. Now that could be county, that could be districts. That is some of those redundancies are likely to happen anyway, but people taking pay cuts or pay freezes is one option that you have over that. There was a comment about the existing unitaries that came in and presented a really good case. There are unitaries out there, I think, as Neil mentioned earlier, that would come in and not present such a glowing report, and they've not been invited to this committee, I don't think, and that is something. So clearly the unitaries that came in were ones that were going to give a good report. You need to talk to unitaries that maybe haven't worked quite so well, would be a suggestion. The work going forward, and it's really important that we collaborate going forward, both as districts, boroughs, with the parishes, with town councils and the county council, because that is the better way to get the reforms that we need and the functional changes to the way that we deliver services in Leicestershire. If I thought there was any possibility of a unitary structure going forward, then I would be encouraging the other district leaders to continue that work. I think it's a dead duck. I don't think a unitary is the way forward, and I think we should get away from it as soon as possible. I think in terms of the comment about minutiae, things like council housing and how the numbers have been calculated for things like car parking and refuse collection are not minutiae. They are fundamental to the calculation of the cost savings. Now there is a weakness that I think in the report it talks about a 2013 consultants report. County Council has saved a phenomenal amount of money since that time, and yet I believe in the report that went to council, there was one statement that basically said county council officers have reviewed it and find that they're still valid, and I find that very weak and unacceptable, really. So there are questions that need to be answered. It's not minutiae. You cannot propose a unitary structure without divulging the basis for the cost savings. and what costs would be charged later on. And my residents would want to know, on garden waste for instance, are they going to be charged nothing? Are they going to be charged £24 or are they going to be charged £54 or something different? And all I'm asking for is clarity on what number was used in the calculations, because it is several £million difference depending which way you go. And if you put everybody's charge up to £54, you will collect a lot more money, millions of pounds more money. If that's part of the 30 million, I would want to know that. Similarly with council rents, if it's not minutiae, we have 3,500, just under 3,500 council homes, tenants paying low rents, and low rents because they've been reduced by 1% a year for the past 3 years and will do so again next year. And they want to know, is their rent going to go up? Is it going to stay at the level it is? And that is, for us, as a district council at the moment, £13 million of income comes from council house rents, and we spend that on council housing. So in a unitary, is that number the same? Has that same basis been used? Or have officers assumed a rental increase? Or have they assumed status quo? And I think that is not minutiae. These are relevant details that could amount to millions of pounds in the savings. If they've not been considered, that's another issue, but we should do. And then final point I want to make is in around the combined authority. The combined authority bid that Leicestershire County, District and the Let put together was for Leicestershire. At the same time, I was involved in the bid for the West Midlands. I think had the Leicestershire bid been accepted by government, it could have worked well for us in getting additional funding into the county. That is not going to happen, and we need to find a model for the East Midlands. Not based on envy of what the West Midlands is doing, but by determining what we want and what are the key priorities. One of the most concerning things I've seen about a unitary is that, you know, the proposals would put planning in one central place. That to me is about power. That is not what people want. People want local planning decisions by local authorities, and we have that already in the district councils. The combined authorities operate differently up and down the country. I believe the one in the West Midlands, there are issues with it. Funding tends to get targeted to a few key areas, and other areas maybe get less attention. I think the way that it's been adopted to try and give districts and county councils a voice, as well as the big city councils, is admirable, but I think again it tends to be dominated by a few voices. I also think the fact that you're only electing a mayor is a weakness in the combined authority. But if we need something like that to give ourselves extra powers, and whether that is for health or transport, roads, economic growth, whatever that need is in the East Midlands, we need to be putting a bid together and putting that to government. And they're not going to tell us you have to have this or you have to do that. They're going to wait until we in the East Midlands have something to offer that is compelling for the government to say yes to. At the moment we don't have that, and I think if a distraction of working on unitary councils across a number of different counties is not helping us get to that point, and that should have been the starting point.
Thank you. Neil, do you want to make a closing?
Thank you, Simon. You can't sugarcoat the message that there are going to be redundancies if this plan is pursued, and this panel should understand and fully appreciate the sort of scale that is going to mean in terms of posts, in terms of costs, because that's where the bulk of the savings is going to come from, and that needs to be managed sympathetically. And I do urge the panel to take evidence from trade unions and be sensitive to the issues that are going to be live there. The questions that were posed by the last 4 or 5 county councillors really did have a theme, and the theme is, well, what can we do now? Essentially, there is a realism that without the parliamentary support, without the Secretary of State's current policy, which has just been announced, the unitary isn't going to proceed now. There may well be change of government, change of Secretary of State, change of policies and so forth. That will come. The District Borough Council leaders accept that local government reform will come. And I began my opening by saying I'm not here to defend the status quo. And we are open-minded about it. You do your piece of work. If you have to put it on the shelf, then put it on the shelf. But rather than leave it dormant on the shelf, as we were talking earlier between the question that Terry asked, there is the ability and the desire, I think, now to undertake functional reform. And as this Terry said, well, let's get back to the egg and not look at the chicken, because while we're waiting for the green light, as it were, from the Secretary of State, we can be getting on with the functional reform. We can be getting in place those aspirations expressed in the County Council's document for a unitary, so we can start the structure about what we can do now. So we can have some constructive and positive work being undertaken now until such time, as I believe it will happen, that a unitary will come, whether it's a single, whether it's a double or even a triple, I don't know. But we can do this piece of work now, and that will be a good framework for whatever is eventually going to come in the next 4 or 5 years or whenever. So I want to end by saying we can do this piece of work. Let's work in partnership. Let's be positive about what we can achieve.
Okay, thank you very much. Nick, would you like to
well, I can try, but obviously there's been a lot of questions and comments. First of all, can I thank the district leaders for coming, although I did find that it was mainly assertions and criticism of our document without any document coming forward from the district councils, because as we know that they have allegedly ceased all work on an alternative. I'm perfectly happy to meet them on the 21st of December. I've not seen an agenda as yet, and I attend or try to attend whenever they invite me. But the basic thing, and I think it was Maggie's point, was the good one, that we're pursuing a new model of local government for Leicestershire, which isn't us, it isn't them, the new unitary authority, because we believe it is in the best interest of the people of Leicestershire to deliver the services that the people of Leicestershire require with the money we've got, and we're not likely to get much more any time soon. So that is the main reason why we're looking at it. Now, to say we're a dead duck or we're a wounded duck or any sort of wounded animal at all belittles the noble purpose with which we're pursuing this. The Secretary of State has not said that we are a dead duck. The Secretary of State is going to be requesting or giving new criteria on which we could bid, or the County Council could bid in the future. That will come out of it. Where areas have failed, he is certainly not inventing 2 tiers. Where the area has failed, like Northampton, he has put in 2 unitaries. He could have gone for 1, he's gone for 2. Northamptonshire's bigger than us. So to say it's a dead duck is not true. We need, as a county council, to be in a position to bid as and when something occurs where we could bid, or he invites bid, or someone fails, or when they announce the comprehensive spending review and the whole spending review going forward. if district councils have all the money cut out from underneath them or suffer some of the cuts that we've suffered, they may well ask us to come up with some criteria. So it is in the interest of the people of Leicestershire, for the senior authority who spends 85% of the money, to have something on the table which represents the views of the county council, my views, your views, and we will take it through full council, as I've said to you, in due course. I've always promised my group it's a free vote. Hopefully it'll be a free vote for the Liberal Democrats and hopefully for the Labour group as well. And that can then form the settled view of the county council. There is one thing I just did want to take issue with Mike on. To compare Leicestershire County Council and the services we provide to Dunelm is most rude in my view. And to say that I can sack all my staff and then re-employ them at lower rates, I'm with Ted on that. It is not good. I can promise the staff of Leicestershire County Council that is not the way we would attempt to do a unitary authority. We would do a unitary authority, if I was in charge of it, the same as Baroness Scott did. And the first thing is, you take everybody and everything on board as is, transition. You then sit down, you look at it, you decide what are the priorities, where you want to provide them, how you want to provide them, and the local stuff I want to be guided by scrutiny. A lot of people saying parishes can't do this, parishes can't do that. Maybe they can't, maybe they can. Some will want to, some won't. Nobody's being forced. You need to consider the area of committees. Do you want to delegate powers down and give them delegated powers, which means the parish councillors can't vote on it? Do you want to give the 110 county unitary councillors money? If so, how much? You know, there was all these things that came out from Baroness Scott and Simon Hennig in particular, which need some consideration to suggest back to us at the cabinet about how we can move forward. I am disappointed districts have stopped their work. I was particularly disappointed when I saw Hinckley-Bosworth ran a motion through their full council that they wanted to be unitary, and now apparently they don't. I don't think 7 unitaries would work. In my view, only 1 unitary can work because of the costs of doing adult social care, children's services and highways. There is no way, in my view, you could split at children's social care. It just would not work. We really struggle now to recruit people, senior people in that area to take the jobs, let alone try and double it up. Then we've got the problems with adult social care. Now, Mike quoted some numbers, and I'm proud of the amount of money we've been spending on social care and children's services. It's something which we should do as a caring administration at County Hall. So I'm not ashamed of those at all. I won't go on anymore. I thank them for their views. On just one other thing, on the minutiae, as Mike called it, or somebody else called it, they are not minutiae, as he rightly points out. They are serious issues. Costs of bin, whether bins are collected or whether you charge 10 quid, 12 quid, 15 quid to have your brown bin collected. Of course, they're serious issues. My view would be, as the leader, that you would always go to the lowest possible cost because then it's easier to sell to people. That's why we've gone for the rate, the council tax level at Mike's area. I would benefit because I live in North West. Mike's people wouldn't benefit, but where there is cost differential, politically, with a big P and a little p, I would tend to go for the lowest in the early, certainly to start with, so it doesn't cause the sort of grief that Mike is talking about. On council housing, again, you would take the council housing levels at exactly what they are, and then over a period of years look at them, as Simon Hennig said. And he said more at lunch when I was sitting with him on refuse collection. He took it on as it was, and there was as much disparity of the ways it's collected, the days it's collected, and costs in Durham than there is here. And he said it took him 5 years to get it right and to get it unified. And he said when he got it right and unified, he saved £7 million. Now, admittedly, we're starting from a longer time ago. Admittedly, there's been savings made by the district since then. But it takes time to make these savings. But those savings are there. That is one thing that is true. So there's 2 or 3 things that are true. Unitary would make a single unitary would make more savings than 2 unitaries. Now, even the MPs who write to me, or letters I've seen them exchanging where they're arguing that if I'd consulted them, they would have suggested 2 unitaries. 1 unitary saves the most money. Second thing is, nobody who's come here has sought to say 2-tier is best and the way it is. Even those who like 2-tier say this, we've got to collaborate, we've got to change, something's got to happen, it can't go on, we're going to be unitarised anyway. Our document, which we're hopefully going to produce, will set out a clear vision for the people of Leicester and Leicestershire that delivers the services they've got and maybe improvements. Baroness Scott hasn't shut a library, for instance, because she's been unitary for years. Either deliver savings or not have to make some of the savings we're going to have to make, and we're all seeing the MTFS coming forward, or improve services. So we're doing this with noble purpose. And I think I'll finish there, Simon, but I thank them for coming along and giving evidence.
I'm going to have to close this now because we've got a very important item on these TIF bids to go on. But what if there's anything else you want to say, gentlemen, can you submit it in writing in basis of what you heard? And we will, when we come back, we will consider anything. Well, look, just 30 seconds.
Yeah, just one quick point. On the comparing the council with Dunelm, that wasn't me, that's in the financial report.
Okay.
So it wasn't me doing that comparison, it's County Council doing that comparison.
Okay, thank you. Can I thank you very much for coming, and you know, the debate will no doubt continue. Thank you.
Ask them to stay for lunch.
Yeah, well, we've got another hour, yeah. Okay, well, what I want to do is just ask our officers, Simon Lawrence, just to sum up any response he wants to make. You don't want to do it? No?
We'll respond at the next meeting.
Okay, you'll come back at the next meeting and do it. Would you prefer that? Okay, sure. Okay. Right. 3-minute break while we change over to highways and transport.
iterations to unlock that housing, to come forward and remove the barriers so that we can have more influence and more control over how growth is delivered in the future. So obviously £5.5 billion is a lot of money. It's spread around the county. There are various, around the country even, it would have been nice. Yeah, that would have been all right, wouldn't it? I'll get on to them, see if they can do that, around the country. And there is various sort of caveats around the fund. So, for instance, they're looking at the moment, they've been out telling us they're looking to put 80% of the funding into the areas with the least affordability. We have some areas in Leicestershire that have got that. We've got some that haven't. So, for instance, Harborough has high rates of low affordability, if that makes sense. So there's lots of things that Homes England are trying to do. What we've tried to do is look at how that's relevant to Leicestershire. So you'll be aware that we are working collaboratively and working very hard across the whole housing market area on the strategic growth plan. And one of the reasons for having a strategic growth plan is to tackle the challenge of, you'll be aware it's 96,000 dwellings to 2031. That's a huge number of dwellings in Leicestershire, but to tackle that proactively, to have control and influence over that and not be reactive to the developer market on its own. And one of the things that the Strategic Growth Plan identifies in Leicestershire is that infrastructure, and in particularly transport infrastructure, is a potential barrier and difficulty in delivering housing growth and the sort of economic performance of Leicestershire in general. So one of the things that we've been asked to do in Highways and Transport is have a look at the opportunity the Housing Infrastructure Fund presents in relation to bidding for money to deliver infrastructure that helps us keep, as a housing market area, keep control over the strategic growth plan delivery and work in that proactive way. So that's why we're interested in that. My colleague Tom's here as well, who has been working on the strategic growth plan. So if you do have any questions about that, we can pick those up. So I understand from the chairman that as well, some of you might not be so familiar with the location and the detail of the area that we're looking to bid for infrastructure. So I thought it would be worth running through those. You notice that we've got two bids that we're looking to submit. One is the South West Leicestershire Growth Area bid. That covers, on page 6, of your slide, you can see a plan there. That covers the Lutterworth area, where there is already a proposal for development there. The area around a proposed junction 20A on the M1, and the area around M69 junction 2. Specifically, the details are still being worked on, but that involves south-facing slips in terms of transport infrastructure on the M69 and mitigation around putting those slips on for the area, because what happens is obviously that attracts a different pattern of traffic. So we're looking at additional road infrastructure that could mitigate that. A new junction on the M1, junction 20A, is something that you'll be aware that we felt is useful in transport terms for a long time at Leicestershire County Council. And the infrastructure at Lutterworth is what's been identified through the local plan process and the ongoing planning application process for delivery of the more definite proposal there at Lutterworth. So that is a bridge over the M1, it's improvements to junction 20 of the M1, and some improvements, a link road through the site, and its improvements to Lutterworth Town Centre. The second bid is one that you might be a little bit more familiar with, is the Melton Mowbray Distributor Road, and that's on page 7. We already have been successful in securing money for the north and eastern sections of the Melton Mowbray Distributor Road, and this bid focuses on the southern section to help the Southern Sustainable Neighbourhood, as they're called in Melton, to come forward with housing growth. So we are still working on the figures and the detail of those, but we expect the combined ask of those two bids to be in the region of £50 million. So it's some really serious money available from government on those. One thing that we do acknowledge, and we have done in the Cabinet report, is that timing of this is all quite difficult, because you might say, well, we've only just started the strategic growth plan. In fact, as we sit here today, it's still to go through some of your local areas and why you're here now. And I think the really simple answer to that, and the nice thing about being able to talk to you about it instead of putting it in a cabinet report, is that it's about staying in the game. So you'll notice that the cabinet report recommendations include coming back through the democratic process should we be successful with the bids. So this isn't the definite decision-making point, it's not the be-all and end-all, but this is about, do we still want to be in the game, and do we want to give ourselves that opportunity? Because, as you know, and I'm sure you all know at a local level as well, planning on a strategic level doesn't happen overnight. It's years in the making. And if we were to adopt the growth plan, move forward, we could be reactive to the market, and in 3 years' time think, oh, some housing infrastructure fund money would have been really handy to build these things right now. And actually, the time to do that is now. So we appreciate that what we really all need to do as we move through this, and there's plenty of process to go through in the individual parts, including local plan development, consultation, but it's about an opportunity to still be in the running for this type of infrastructure and this type of investment in Leicestershire as we go forward. I think there's a couple of things as well that I'd just like to sort of offer from our experience working in highways and transport in terms of the opportunities that having something like the strategic growth plan offers. It's held in very high regard with central government. Homes England are very pleased with the work that we all have been doing in order to progress a joint approach to growth and a proactive approach to growth. And again, I think these bids are an opportunity to sort of maximise that momentum, take advantage of it, if you like, for Leicestershire's benefit. And I think the other point that I would like to make, and Homes England and MHCLG representatives are probably bored to death of me hearing make the same point. Whilst they might be interested in housing growth as one thing, we in Leicestershire and you all and we all have to plan a cohesive programme that takes account of economic growth, where we want jobs. We don't just do bits and bobs. You'll be familiar that our infrastructure bill around the county now, as local plans progress, is growing. So forgive me for not being exact, but we're in the region of £70 million at Melton. We're in the region of £30 million at Loughborough, Junction 23. We're on the A46. That's another £7-8 million. So we are spending quite a lot of money all around there to unlock relatively small, in comparison, you know, when you look across the whole, parts of housing and jobs together. So what our challenge is in highways and transport is to look for opportunities that unlock housing and employment growth and support improved transport infrastructure all in one go. So if it happens that the opportunity that comes up is housing, we're ready for that, and Homes England are over here. It might be the DFT, like it was with Melton, we're over here. But I don't want you to think that we think of that in silos. We're aware that it's not just housing growth. So you'll be aware that the areas we've identified here from highways and transport point of view are of use whatever happens through the following processes. So for instance, we think there's benefit in what we're looking at from a transport point of view, we think there's benefit from a housing point of view, and we think there's benefit in them from an economic point of view. So we're not working in that silo, although that is how the funding comes to us. I think the last point I would make is just to reiterate that there are several processes that we would still be going through, we would be, the planning authorities would be, before these things hit the ground. It's not a case of put the money in, get the money in May, start in June. There are other processes to go through on some of these, and I'm happy to talk about any particular queries that people have. But I just wanted to almost reassure you as a committee that we are aware of those things. I think that's probably all I wanted to say on a general level.
Explaining what the proposal is, and we'll open it to questions that members will have. I'm just wanted just to be clear about the process then, because there's a date in here which says the money's got to be drawn down, if it was successful, drawn down by 22-23. And yet, as you've acknowledged, there are other processes, not least the democratic process, to go through in terms of any decisions about these. None of these, well, with the possible exception of housing in Melton, but none of these proposals actually have planning permission directly at the minute, and one of them is through the national scheme, isn't it, and not a decision to be made locally. So I'm just interested in the tie-up. But so if they were minded to say, yes, we'll give you this money, presumably it's conditional on all the other processes, because residents, we need to be careful. Residents don't think, well, actually, it's a done deal and there's no opportunity for the public to engage. And there is, as we know, there is concern, and there will be opposition to some of these schemes at the planning stage.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. You're absolutely right. So the part of the award would effectively be conditional on us delivering everything that was in the plan. So, for instance, if there is a local plan development to happen and a planning application to be approved, that still has to happen. There's no question that the HIF award kind of overrides any local democracy or any local processes to go through. What we're really looking for the opportunity to do is to still be in that running when those things are happening, because what we often find, and I'm sure all of you have got examples in your local patches of a very long lag between planning decisions for big strategic infrastructure sites, housing, employment, and then the actual delivery of those things. And what that leaves you at risk of is speculative development in the meantime, which you didn't plan for and isn't planned for in terms of infrastructure. So what we're trying to do is be ready for that, is to learn from the last round of local plans and other development in Leicestershire and be ready to respond if that continues to be in alignment with the policies, local plans, Leicestershire County Council's position. I think the alternative is to think this is quite difficult now. We should just leave it till we know exactly what's happening. But then we'll be another 3 years behind that process. So as you say, delivery of some of these schemes, and it won't surprise you to know that Leicestershire is not the only one that's pushing, saying that a lot of its delivery will be later on in this window, 23. We have heard potential that might extend out. So if you waited till 2023 to do the bid, the likelihood is you're waiting till 2027, 28 to deliver the infrastructure, at which point we've either not had the information to respond to developers coming in. So the NSIP application is a really good example. Massive bit of development there, but we want to be in the position to respond and work with them and understand the impact. If we sort of wait, we're at risk of being reactive to development, which is what the strategic growth plans work so hard to give us the opportunity not to do.
Okay, thank you. Right, we'll take some questions. I've already seen David Bill and Terry Einan. So, David, do you want to go first?
Can I ask some questions first of all, and then I've got several points to make. I did try to actually. I rang up the office on Friday to ask these questions as soon as I saw these plans, but nobody was able to. I wasn't able to get any answers. Looking at page 15 of the report which handed out yesterday, Appendix B, the Southwest Leicestershire development area, there is a blue line there. I find that disturbing because I know it's only just a felt tip pen just drawing a boomerang shape all around the area, but I can see that it cuts deep into Hinckley, cuts off Burbage Common, and presumably that was done deliberately, unless it's anyway. So I am disturbed about that, and perhaps I could be given some reassurance that that boomerang isn't now going to be the development area of the southwest. And then there are some. I asked about this on Friday, but didn't get a reply. South-facing slip roads to the M69. That's been around since the time of Nigel Lawson when he represented Blaby, and it was turned down then because it would have had an impact on traffic through Sapcut. So that was why that was stopped. But there is a lot of. I understand now why people are suggesting that would be an improvement. But it goes on then to say link improvement around Stony Stanton and Sapcut. I don't know what that means. I really would like an explanation of that bullet point. Then it says a new spine road to the proposed new station. I'm not aware that under the so-called Hinckley Freight Depot that there is any new station being proposed. We've asked for one, and asked for a new station at we've asked for Elmthorpe Station to be reopened, and we've been doing that for 20 years or more. But I'm not aware of a proposal. And then at the bottom left-hand corner, there's a postage stamp map there referring to the Southern Gateway Master Plan. And I'm afraid I've no idea what that might be, because I thought the Southern Gateway had been abandoned, but that now reappears. So I would like to know what that is. Then I've got a whole series of comments to make on the report itself. But
well, let's get some answers to those points. So a bit more detail on what's proposed on that corridor. And yeah, I picked up on that. I thought we were abandoning the Southern Gateway.
Thank you for those. I'll try and remember to answer all the points, but please pick me up if I don't. So firstly, yeah, I can absolutely offer you reassurance on the blue line. As many of you probably know when you've looked at our bids before, there is an element of playing the game with the bid authority that you're working to. So the blue line there represents really our commentary around that these sites can go into one bid, because you're originally only very likely to get one bid successful. We've been very fortunate in Leicestershire to have 2 bids put through. So rather than break these down into individual bids, it was a tactical decision to include them and label it a growth area. At the time that the expressions of interest went in, very short timescale, the Southern Gateway was part of the proposed growth plan, so we were using that as an example. And I should say that submissions to the growth plan or responses to it from the market were couched in those terms. We absolutely appreciate that the latest version of the growth plan does no longer refer to a southwest Southern Gateway, and we won't be doing that in the future. Questions around the link road and Stony Stanton and Sapcut picks up on your earlier point, actually, Councillor Bill, which was that if you just put south-facing slips on and you don't provide any other link roads, what you get is a lot of rat running through local villages. And forgive me, I don't have the exact numbers or detail, but I think you're absolutely right. That affects Stony Stanton, Sapcut, and potentially also possibly some areas of Hinckley. So the idea is that you put in a link road, you don't just put slips on, and that the slips are obviously part of the proposal for the strategic rail freight interchange on the other side, so we wanted to respond to that as part of that. Again, in relation to the proposed new station, again, you're right, it's about the potential. So the market and again the National Rail Freight Interchange are also aware of the local desire to have improved rail connections and the potential for a new station. So what our bid will look at is the potential opportunities it opens. You're absolutely right, it's not a definite thing. So I think that covers off the points you made initially. Have I missed something out?
Where is this new road intended to go? That's one thing. It specifically refers to a spine road. Now, in which direction? Because there's no road shown on this little map. Is there? I mean, you must have better eyesight than I have then. I think, could we have in other words, Chairman, could we have a proper map, a full-size map? Because if we're putting in for such a serious change to where we live, I really would appreciate a little bit more than the postage stamp on which to make that decision. And I still don't understand this little postage stamp, the bottom left-hand corner. I can see yellow, green, and red. But what on earth is that? And I really would like to know before sticking my hand up in approving a bid for what is you know.
Would a bigger map show this in a bit more detail? Could you do us an A3 or something?
We can circulate one. What I would say though is that in relation to the master plan, these are really there to show Homes England that there is what I term when I'm talking to them, real people with real money that are interested in developing these. So this isn't an approved master plan. It's not Leicestershire County Council's position. It's the ideas that are floating around from the market. So please don't. We can circulate something, but it wouldn't necessarily represent Leicestershire's proposals. In terms of exactly where the road's going to go, part of the money is to determine that work. There will be consultation. So again, I'm happy to. Please don't think I'm not happy to share the information, but it's the purpose for which it's being put there. I just want to make that clear. So that's we can send something round to this group. That's not a problem. But I think the point's there, and you'll notice that the other master plans are equally as postage stampy. It's about illustrating the point that the market is there. To have a master plan for that area would go through Blaby, in this case, is Blaby's planning process. It's not a decision that Highways would make.
Chairman, I'm sorry to come back to this. Please look at the plan on page 15. The bottom left-hand corner shows Southern Gateway Master Plan. All right, it's not going to be called Southern Gateway. All right, that's fair enough. But that is literally the size. I mean, we exaggerate when we talk postage stamps, but that's about 1 inch by 3/4 of an inch. And what is it? Where could I simply ask, where is
that? The Lutterworth SDA? Yeah.
That's Lutterworth, is it?
So this one here relates to the M69.
That's the one you mean, isn't it, David? Bottom left. Yeah. Yeah.
It's an example, and I know I'm really emphasising this point, but it's really important. It's an example of what the market might propose in an area like that. It is not Leicestershire's County Council's proposed master plan for that area.
What area of land is that?
For the M69 area, the green one here, in this corner. The Lutterworth master plan is in this corner.
Chairman, it's not particularly meant to see, and it's not particularly meant for mass distribution to scaremonger people. It's there to enable us to show DFT and these transport people that there is business interest in it. And also, David, to be fair, we've done really, really well to get where we are. So that's what it's for. I don't think it would be anybody's interest to publish it and let people think or perceive that it's our vision for that area. It's to show DFT people that, subject to Harbour or Blaby passing it ultimately, that there is market demand there for it to attract the highways infrastructure money. So we don't want to set hairs running by putting out A3, A4, A5s, which hopefully David won't put in some focus leaflet out there scaring people, because it's not meant for that.
I think the word is indicative, isn't it?
So that is junction 2 of the M69 is the area of that. But like I say, I think the points that Councillor Rushton's made are absolutely right, in the sense that we don't want to elevate the status of a master plan that would undermine a planning process. It's an example to show that people are interested in that area. The real crux of what the Cabinet report is doing, and why we're here today, is the principles of applying for the funding.
Do you think it would be helpful to remove Southern Gateway off it then, just for avoidance of doubt?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, can you do that?
Very well indeed. Farmland, countryside and all the rest of it, woodland. And when my role here all right, we do want to encourage, we do want to encourage business, we want to encourage investment, but we also have to listen to the people we represent. And nobody, I cannot see how I personally can vote for something without knowing exactly what it is I'm voting for. I've been around this silly game for about 45 years now, and I would never vote for something, a blank check to say, send this off, and then without knowing the details.
Yeah, we're not. I think
this is almost like an invitation to treat to the Department for Transport to get the money. It's still got to go through all the planning process, and if the boroughs, whoever it is, refuse it, we don't get the money. It doesn't get built. But we need to show where the market is expressing an interest that this money would facilitate that development. So that's why we don't want to bandy around big pictures. It is unfortunate we've used the word Southern Gateway, because I know the MAG group deleted the word Southern Gateway. It's now just a Southern something, which Harbour are going to determine. But it is an invitation to treat to upper echelons of government to try and get money in if this development goes ahead, David.
Okay, I think it's been helpful to get a clarity of what the status of this is. So that really, trying to sum up, this is about making a bid for infrastructure, the details of which will be dependent on planning decisions to be made at a later date elsewhere that haven't been made yet. Indeed, the actual detailed proposal hasn't been established. In the case of this one that David's concerned about, that will be Blaby. Is it all in Blaby?
Yeah.
It's all Blaby. There will be an impact on Hinckley, but it's all, yeah.
Sorry, apart from obviously the Lutterworth SDA is Harborough.
Yeah, okay, right. Let's take Terry Inan then, and take your question.
Right, well, I do think that Mr. Bills helped to clarify some of my concerns. I mean, in principle, infrastructure first, yes, absolutely. Obviously, we also need to get infrastructure right, and you know, the kind of things that bother residents are, you know, if we increase road capacity, which will enable us to increase house building, are we then going to increase commuting, which will then increase congestion? And neither of these are in my patch, you know, but I'm well aware that in my patch, you know, we've got part-time, low-paid jobs and 4-bedroom houses, which is, they just don't match really. So one of the concerns that I think the residents will be bringing is, you know, at what point will all of these new bits of infrastructure get overwhelmed if we haven't thought that particular equation through? Is that a calculation that gets taken into account? And then to come back to Mr. Bill's very valid points, I think as a local member or a member of a district local plan committee, you're going to have a detailed understanding of what's going on here, which I do not have about either of these patches because they're not in North West Leicestershire. So at what point will this be discussed at local plan committees, who will be able to, you know, feed in their views and make their support for it?
Jana.
Sorry, I was a bit too enthusiastic there, wasn't I? Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so firstly on your first point around matching up the appropriate housing, putting housing near employment, doing the best we can on that, I think I would say, and you would say I would, of course I would, but I would say that being involved in something like the Housing Infrastructure Fund and having the growth plan really provides the opportunity to do that. So for instance, with a national rail freight interchange proposal, admittedly that planning decision will not be made locally in Leicestershire. The ability to respond to that with housing in the area or potential for would alleviate some of those things. Also with county council involvement and district involvement through the planning authority, the idea is we can add value to that process because, as you say, the market is very interested in 4-bedroom houses. That's, you know, perhaps where the money is. We can increase the housing mix. It's something Homes England are very interested in, and make sure that those developments are in line with things like affordable housing policy, that type of thing. So we add value in that sense as well. Things way beyond that get a bit complex for people in highways and transport like me, but that we are looking to influence. I think then, like you say, the ability for local people to influence those processes, to understand what that means locally, and I think that's the next challenge following on from the strategic growth plan is, well, that's all very nice on a Leicestershire level. What does that mean for me? I'm a resident of Harbour, for instance, so what does that mean there? Is really important. So what we've been doing is liaising through the strategic growth plan group, MAG, for instance, and talking about the principle of this, an opportunity, and recognising that much like the growth plan, the local plans, either through, so if it's a local plan development that such as Blaby are about to look at, or planning application process, that consultation is done locally, and we've made sure that we haven't done anything that will sort of preempt or prevent that process from taking its normal course. So that is where people will be involved at a much more local level. Like I say, and I know I've used the phrase before, this is really about still being in the game when those decisions are taken. So I hope that helps.
Terry Richardson.
Thank you, Chairman. I think what I'd say on this is all of us would like to be like King Canute and hold back the tide of development. But my biggest postbag, and this will have a great impact on my division, because should the rail freight interchange take place, it has a major impact on the crossing in Narborough and how long that crossing will be closed for, which has a material impact. So this is, wider than where the thing is built. It affects all our divisions in some way. What I do know from my postbag is that, when we have planning applications, sometimes we're successful in stopping them, sometimes they happen. What our residents never thank us for is, if they do happen, what mitigation do we get for it happening? So do we get any infrastructure? Too often we've had development with no infrastructure. And therefore what we're talking about here is, if you like, almost planning for the worst from what our residents would perceive, in that if these things happen, and a lot of our residents will not want them to happen, what mitigation can we have for the benefit of those residents that will make their life better? It won't be better than it would have been had it not happened in our perception, but it'd be a darn sight better than if we have nothing. And therefore, if we don't take the decision when we know that people are interested, so, the strategic rail freight interchange, a developer has put in a bid for it. It will go to government. The Secretary of State will sign it off. It will not be signed off by Blaby District Council or any local authority. But what I do know as a county councillor is that the best way I can protect my residents is to look at all of the options that might be available to them, irrespective of whether it happens or not. If we bury our head in the sand and just say, we're going to fight this tooth and nail and it will never happen, we might be successful. But what if we're not successful? What if it does go ahead? What do we provide our residents with to control things like air quality, to mean they can get in and out of their villages? And these are very crucial decisions, and I think it behoves us as councillors to actually look at both sides of the coin. And I said to hope for the best and plan for the worst, or hopefully somewhere in the middle we actually come up with the best we can out of it. So, none of us, I think, look at these things with any great pleasure, but the best way to protect our residents is to have a plan to do things in the best way we can to actually meet the housing numbers, to provide the infrastructure that's required. So we all get hung up over lines on maps. We all know that if anyone's talking about a road, it will have 27 surveys, 2 public inquiries, the route will be changed 52 times. So everybody wants a route on a map. It cannot be provided. There's a lot of conspiracy theories that says there is a route already predetermined. We know from HS2 that's not the case. Every time they look at a bit of land, they have to change the route. And therefore, I applaud the fact that as a county council, we are seeking to attract funding that may not be drawn down, may not be required, but if it is required, may actually make the lives of our residents a darn sight better than it would have been had we not applied for it.
Thank you, Terry. I'm going to take that as a statement, and you don't need a reply. Maggie Wright.
This is actually my division. I know I'm here as a substitute today, and I was surprised. Well, when this came up, you know, it was on the agenda. And I would echo really what Mr. Bill has said and say, could it please be stressed that this is potential opportunities and desire, because there is overwhelming concern in this area of this massive development. The one thing I will say, though, as Terry's just said, it's to be determined by the Secretary of State, and it's really frustrating that we as a local authority will be consulted, but we don't have the final say. But I do know, because I know these villages well, I was brought up in the villages, they are very dear to my heart. Without infrastructure, they will not survive this massive, and it is massive, overwhelming development of the strategic rail freight. We're struggling now for infrastructure. We've got traffic lobbying groups, and we've got the enforcement cameras over at Sharnford. So I'd just like that put on record, please. And as I say, it is quite overwhelming. But thank you.
Just to clarify a couple of comments within, this it's not even gone in yet, has it? No. Okay, so just be clear, because someone said it's going to be determined. It'll go through a process. I understand that we will be consulted, and you know, as the body that has responsibility, scrutiny-wise, for planning strategic stuff, we might want to look at it and make some comments. So you know, we can come back to that as and when.
Yeah. Maggie's comments should be reported to Cabinet and form part of the record, because I know obviously for Maggie's area it is a huge issue. So if we can get them,
Rosemary has been for the last 3 hours. I don't know how many pages she's done sat next to me, but I can assure you there will be a thorough note. And of course, it's for you to. But she could of course come and speak as well if she wants to, couldn't she?
She can if she wants to, obviously as a local member. But if the comments form part of the record, it might save Maggie a journey.
Okay, right. Anyone else who want Rosita?
Just to add on to that, I hear what Maggie's saying, but when we're looking at these developments, there is also an impact on the wider areas, and that is something that is really important to look at. And I think that needs to be also noted, that when we're looking at this, for instance, if you have that in Maggie's area, or you have the garden village, the impact, the gain probably from the roadworks will be to Blaby. However, I declare an interest, the pain could be, and the negative effect onto the Harbour district. And so I think it is really important that in all future discussion, the wider impact will be also assessed, and see how any future alleviation schemes can also negate the negative impact all around. Thank you.
That's a comment as well, I think.
Yes, it was.
Okay. Any other comments before we submit these to Cabinet? David, you got the last word?
Last 18 months, but basically, looking on page 15, and I still don't understand where this postage stamp is. I honestly, I might be sounding facetious, but I am not going to vote for anything which I can't read. I haven't got eyes like what was the phrase we used to use, but we can't use that here. I might have been able to read that map once, but now it is so minuscule. I cannot identify that as being anywhere I know. I look at the yellow area, which is the freight depot. It's not a rail freight depot. It'll be a massive warehousing site with sidings on, which might or might never ever be used. That is 440 acres, that adjacent to Burbage Common. Then you look at the green area to the right of it, and I do apologise for coming on to Maggie's patch, but it does all join together. That looks to me much bigger than the yellow area, so we can say that's about 600 acres. So now we're talking new development in next to between Hinckley and Stony Stanton of 1,000 acres. Well, we are if we approve this map, aren't we? We are. We're giving justification to it. And when you read the report gives every indication that the A46 is going to go through, because in fact it specifies junction 2, although it's not shown on this map. That is an additional thing. It refers to the national freight interchange as a given. Well, it's there, isn't it? It's in the report. The wording, you can play around with the wording, but it's in the report. It talks about the whole thing being confidential anyway, so whether that means that we can no longer talk about it, I find that weird. And so I don't want to prolong this, but I said at the county council meeting yesterday that I think we're over providing. There is not going to be that exponential growth of population if the Office of National Statistics information is correct. Therefore, I just wish my name to be recorded against this process, because I want to be honest about it. I think it's over providing. It won't just be housing, because what we're getting in our area is massive warehousing. Homes for people is one thing, but warehousing just full of conveyor belts, is something else. And I just I wish
Rosita
to be recorded against it.
Rosita has a proposal in terms of clarifying what it is we are commenting on. Do you want to clarify that, Rosita?
I can't think at the moment, but hang on, before we go to Hillary, could we just put a caveat on that, you just emphasise that this is an indicative scheme and it does say at the bottom, but could you just elaborate a little bit more and put that on, and that will, take away all
clarification. And to ask Janet, is there any reason why we can't do that?
I was actually just going to have a quick sneaky look over at Rosemary, because I think we've now got the cabinet report online, but we could we add something on to the agenda as a covering statement?
What we will do is we will send our comments to cabinet. Rosemary will write those up. Nick has already said that he particularly wants Maggie's comments too. And then it's for the cabinet to take that on board and ask for the final detail to be whatever the maps are or whatever, to clarify that, and it's done there. So yeah, that's the way we do it. Yeah, okay. Hillary.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wasn't born in Leicestershire, and I've never lived in the place where I was born, except being born, so I have no preconceived, but I have lived here for over 30 years, so I've seen all sorts of things happen. What I just want to make sure, and it possibly a statement combined with a question, what we are here today for is not to discuss in great detail planning applications. We are here to make sure we're at the table when they decide where the money's going for the infrastructure. And therefore, if we don't put in a bid, we'll get nothing, but we'll still get everything else. So therefore, if we're not at the table and we haven't put in our bid, this bid may not succeed, but at least we've got to have a chance of it. And I would like to draw attention, I get very worried. In the village I live, Mr. Bill, in 10 years we've had 1,000 houses built with no infrastructure. So I'm fully aware of the damage that can be caused. And I live in the old part of the village, which they can't change. I've read the bottom of the page 15, besides the maps, and to me, that showed me that's not what we're putting forward. This is to show them what could happen. I was also I know a bit about this because I was on a borough council many years ago when they planned and built the M25. And if we don't do it properly and there was no money for that for the district, we've got to have this in. So I hope I've understood it properly, Chair, that this is what we're saying. We're not deciding development here, there and everywhere. We are deciding
I think we do know that.
money.
I think we do know that. Yeah, we're not a planning committee yet. Okay. He's raising concerns about what the consequences might be of going down this route.
We are not deciding these developments. Well, who is
Yes.
then?
No
If we're
more.
not-
We've got to
somebody
complete.
somewhere is making decisions on our behalf, and I think we owe it to the people you represent to speak out and say there is an alternative point of view.
Okay, that's
Thank
fair
you.
enough.
No more.
Janet, did you want to add anything finally?
I think probably just to round off and say that I absolutely agree. In fact, probably I wish I could have expressed it like that at the beginning. So thank you for that. And yeah, just to reiterate that again, it really is about having the opportunity. We as a highway authority are not there to make planning decisions.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, so Bill.
Mr. Chair, in the process, the scrutiny process, this is the last time we're going to look at this as a scrutiny process, because according to this, it's all been delegated after today.
Okay,
I mean, should
my
it not come
understanding
back to
is that
scrutiny
the officers
sometime?
the officers will have delegation to go ahead to submit the bid. Then, if we get offer before we would actually go ahead with the scheme, it will have to go back to cabinet, and anything that goes to cabinet, we're entitled to look at. So, if we ask Roseby to, we have a thing on our plan of things that need to come up in the future, and we keep an eye on it. So we know what the cabinet's doing, and then we fit in with that. So if what you're saying is, if we do get the money, and if schemes do come forward, we want to see it again. Okay, is that all right?
Yes.
Good. Right. So David, you want to be recorded as being against the bid? Is that right? I don't.
I want us to see this county develop in a way which is in the interest of the people who live here.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And not necessarily. Well,
I think we all agree with that.
Yes. I would like my name to be recorded against this process because I still do not. I cannot read the maps in front of me. I do not believe that we should be issuing plans to the government which we can't even read ourselves.
Okay. Okay, right. I'm going to finish it there, close the meeting. Thank the leader and the officers for coming. Can I remind you that as it stands, the next meeting is the 28th of January, so that's after you've all had a Christmas break. However, the unitary structure is unfinished business, and we're clearly going to need one more meeting. We've got some work to do before then, because a number of you have made requests to talk to other people and get other evidence, and we've really got to manage that, how we're going to do it. So it is possible there will be another meeting before the 28th of January, but obviously we will keep you informed. Thank you very much.